Hello everyone, welcome to our event this evening. I hope that everybody can hear and see me. If you're able to give me a little message in the chat box just to let us know, that would be great. Just checking that all our technology is working as we should. Oh, thank you Vicky. I think that's Vicky from Bridgewater. Oh, brilliant, people coming in saying that it's all working fine. That's always a relief to know. Thank you, everybody. So, right. Hello and welcome. Should introduce myself first. My name is Emma and I work for Somerset Libraries. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's event, which is part of our Somerset Libraries Presents programme. I'm delighted that tonight we are joined by novelist Lindsey Davis. But before I introduce Lindsey, I'll just explain a bit about how the event's going to run. So Lindsey will be taking us virtually to the world of Rome and her latest Albia novel, Desperate Undertaking. So Lindsey's going to chat about that probably for around 30 minutes, and then you'll have the chance to ask her a question. So to do that, we're using the chat box, which is the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can pop your questions in there throughout the event, and I'll keep an eye on those for you. Your camera and microphone will be switched off during the event, and we are actually recording the event as well, and that will be available afterwards on our Somerset Libraries YouTube. So that's all the housekeeping out of the way. To our amazing author tonight. Lindsey Davis is the author of the Falco and Albia Roman series, and 2022 is a milestone for Lindsey with the publication of her 10th Flavia Albia story, making a total of 30 books in the Falco and Albia series. And we're just doing a little poll whilst we're waiting for everybody to join, and it looks as though nearly 60% of you have actually read between 20 and 30 books. So that's of Lindsey's books. That's pretty impressive, I think. And actually, for 90% of you, oh, there we go. The poll has just popped up. Anne's doing that for me. 90% of you, it's the first time you've ever attended a Lindsey Davis event. Oh, sorry, 88% up-to-date information there. I was using old information. So that's pretty impressive. Thank you all for joining us. And I should say that all of Lindsey's books are available to borrow from Somerset Libraries, of course. So Lindsey has won many prizes for her writing, including a Crime Writers Association Cartier Diamond Dagger, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but that's for a lifetime achievement as a mystery writer. And she's also won the Crime Writers Association Ellis Peters Historical Dagger, and a prize from the City of Rome for enhancing the image of Rome, which I hope Lindsey will tell us a little bit about during her talk. So we are thrilled that Lindsey is here, and it gives me great pleasure to hand you over to her. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the magic of Zoom, I pop onto your screens, I hope. If not, let me know, but if I'm there, don't worry. Thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thank you all for coming. We've got 40 people, which is a really good attendance. I'm very pleased with that. For those of you who haven't seen me before, I will say you can see me every month. If you go to my website, there's a thing where I do reading for grown-ups, and we have a sort of little book club that goes every month, and I read longer extracts than I am going to read tonight, certainly. But tonight I'm here to talk about my new book. It's like being on the telly, really. I have been writing now for an incredible long time, probably half my lifetime. I started in the late 1980s. I knew I wanted to be a historical novelist. I thought I wanted to write about the English Civil War, and that's what I wanted, but it wasn't what publishers wanted. In fact, in those days, publishers thought that historical novels were very difficult to sell, and so they wouldn't buy them. And when I came along trying to write about the Civil War, that was not a very popular period at all. In fact, it still isn't really, possibly because it's rather grim. And then when I decided I'd got to change my subject and move to the Romans, that originally, it seems hard to believe now, was seen as even more difficult. Publishers were sure that audiences wouldn't be able to cope with anything in the ancient world at all, not in the field of popular fiction anyway. We'd had I, Claudius, and Claudius the God, of course, and they had been on TV, which in the end was one of the things that helped me persuade publishers that it would be acceptable to do. I started out, I suppose at heart, I'm a romantic novelist, and the first really serious book I wrote was called The Course of Honour, and it's the love story of the Emperor Vespasian and his mistress, Antonia Caenis, who was a freed slave, so he couldn't marry her. This is always really good for a romantic novelist, is to have people with that kind of attention, that kind of tension, not attention. Nobody would buy it. Nobody would buy it. It was much too hard. You couldn't have a love story about a Roman emperor. And the fact that he was middle class in origin, I think, still tends to count against poor old Vespasian. He was jolly. He knew how to make things work, and he was a tax collector's grandson. I responded to that very well because I had been a civil servant before I set out to be a writer. But it's still one of those things that a certain amount of prejudice probably still counts against him. I didn't know that he was the man who built the Colosseum when I started, and I'm sure there are many other people who don't know, or who don't know much about him. But there he was, and I wrote my book, and it was the first really good book that I wrote. I knew in my heart it was. And so when it wasn't published, I put it in the back of a wardrobe and kept it. And then I had to find something else to write. And what I did was to use the material I'd researched for the period of Vespasian to have one last go and write a spoof detective story. It struck me that the Rome I had now learned about, the Rome of the AD 70s, was a big metropolitan city with lots of people on the make, including the emperor, you could argue. And this would make a kind of Philip Marlowe background for a kind of 1940s gumshoe, though he wouldn't have read the book, so he wouldn't know what he was supposed to be like. Wisecracking, seeking information that he can sell, living at the top of a very nasty building, waiting for someone to bring him some job he doesn't really want, where he's likely to be beaten up and he may not get paid at the end of it. And so Falco was born. I didn't want him to be Philip Marlowe. I wanted him to be my own man. And I therefore overturned some of the stereotypes, the first of which was that because he was Italian, instead of making him an absolute loner, and think about Marlowe, we know nothing about his background. His parents are never mentioned. We don't know where he went to school, except we can deduce it was Dulwich College in England because he's so very good at long metaphors. Falco, though, I gave a huge Italian family for a joke. I didn't realise that by doing so, I'd found what I was going to be doing for the next 30 years, which is not just writing mystery stories, which I do, because they're a good way to write novels, but to write about Falco, his friends, his associates, his family especially. Before I knew it, I was writing The Roman Archers, which is interesting because when I was at school, I was in the same class, in fact, next on the registry to Mary Cutler, who was one of the longest running script writers of The Archers. So it's interesting to think we both came out of that class. I used to joke with her that I was doing everything that she was doing, except she would never be able to have a lion come bounding across the fields of Borchester and kill one of her characters when she needed to weed one out. And she would respond to that somewhat jealously. She's still one of my best friends. And so when eventually, in one of those strange circles that sometimes happen in the publishing world, it was Mary who dramatized the first Falco novels for Radio 4. She did it quite well on the basis that, in the most literal sense, I knew where she lived. So if she messed them about, I would have been able to deal with her. But she didn't. She appreciated what they were. She had to change them quite a lot. She had to leave out a lot of what I think makes the Falco novels and now the Albia novels special when they are talking to us, because they are all written in the first person. And they tell us what they think about everything, really, not just the crime they are particularly investigating, but Roman society and life in general. And that I found that suited me a great deal. I have to be very careful with Falco, and I still have to be careful with Albia, not to let them say what I think. I have to decide what they think as a typical Roman man who is cynical about the Roman world and yet is at heart wanting to be a typical Roman, father of a family, doing a job, voting when he's allowed to vote. It's part of Falco's persona that he is genuinely Roman, although he is also doing a job which is straight out of modern crime writing. Except that I don't have to do guns. I'm so relieved about that, I can't tell you. So I set off writing about Falco and found that he was really good fun to do. I loved his sense of humour, which is basically a Brummy sense of humour, but transposed to the ancient world. I didn't know when I started that I would be able to get published or able to write a series. So people sometimes ask me, did I plan it? And the answer is not at all. I still don't really. I don't plan more than one book ahead, if that, on the whole. Very occasionally I've done a little set of 3, but even then it's only very vaguely delineated what the set is going to be. It happened that in the very first book, in order to make it more palatable to publishers, I brought Falco to Britain. So I thought if he came here, they'd like it more. And so he comes to Britain. He has a really horrible adventure in the silver mine. And then I found that I quite liked doing parts of the Roman world with him. I could go on really good holidays so long as I didn't enjoy them, because they were a business expense and must not be enjoyed, or it didn't count. So with him, almost every other book, though I'm not tied to that strictly, but almost every other book, he goes to a part of the Roman world. And one of the things he did was to come back to Britain, cursing it because he hates it. And while he was here in Roman Londinium, he and Helena come across a little street scavenger. And Falco, I think, feels a certain responsibility towards her because she was discovered as a baby in the Boudiccan revolt. Nobody knows who she is. And the Roman part of Falco, certainly, and also to some extent Helena, feel responsible for this child who could be anybody. She might be a slave's child, but she's more likely to be a trader's child. She could even be the little tiny daughter of a Roman official. Nobody will ever know, and they won't ever know because I'm not going to write it. But finding her in distress, Helena decides that she has to be rescued, and Falco, because he does have a good heart, goes along with it. And this placed her in my series. First of all, just as someone they thought would be a useful nursemaid for their baby daughters. But gradually she wends her way more and more into the family. They adopt her. They bring her to Rome. They educate her, because Helena is the sort of woman who educates anybody who comes within her reach. And she becomes, in effect, a full daughter to them, except she's not related by blood. She's there. I continue to write the Falco series. Albia is a troubled adolescent in the later Falco books. Falco goes to other countries, but then he comes back to Rome and has a showdown with his bugbear and nemesis, Anacrates, the chief spy. Another character who wasn't really in the story when I first started. He first appears in book 2 as a sinister agent of the emperor. And then it suited me to set him up as the opposite of Falco, although they're doing the same job. Falco is a freelance. He has to make his own way. He has to earn his own money. Anacrates is a salaried official. Falco is very good because he has to be. Anacrates is less good because he doesn't need to be. He's got his job. He'll have his pension. He's a pale shadow, really, of Falco, and gets more and more jealous of Falco, although Helena reckons that Anacrates wants to be Falco and have his exciting life and his success. He strives in vain, really, and we end up, he gets worse and worse in behaviour because he had a fan club. People kept writing to me and saying, he started life as a slave. Why are you so horrible to him? I'm horrible to him because he's trying to kill Falco all the time. Oh, but I will make him behave even more badly. And so he ends up in the last book as about as bad as you can be. And at that point, my own life changed quite considerably in many ways. My partner died after some years of illness. My editor moved to a different publisher. I had to part with my original literary agent. Everything was changing, and I was getting older, and I realized that I'd said everything I wanted to say, really, about Falco and Helena in their own right. At the same time, I had a film option, which eventually came to nothing, but part of the film option was that I had to sign away rights to everything I would ever write, everything I had written. And when they ran out of books, if they made the entire series, I had to say that they could write a spin-off series. And being the kind of person I am, I decided that I wasn't going to let them choose who the spin-off series was. I would choose for myself. And one of the things I would choose was that the next series would be not about a man, because I'd been writing as a man, in fact, for 20 years, but I wanted to change. And so it ended up that of several contenders, there were several contenders. I'm not going to tell you who the others were in case I ever want to write another spin-off series. But Albia came to the fore. And what I actually did was I didn't want to write about her as a teenager, not as my main character. I'm interested in teenage girls because I've been one, but I wanted her to be mature when I was writing about her in her own right. And so I had written as my first book for the new publisher, a book that in some ways is comparable to The Course of Honour, my very first book about Vespasian, Master and God, which is about the reign of the Emperor Domitian. It's in some ways unappealing to me because he's a very reclusive, paranoid character, and I had never been attracted to writing about Domitian until I found out that he ended his life being assassinated, as so many characters in history do. But Domitian was different. Domitian was assassinated not by the next person coming along who wanted his job, the usurping next person, but he was, for the good of Rome, done away with by a committee, a kind of civil service committee. And that did appeal to me as an ex-civil servant. So purely with the idea of writing this assassination and the plot that leads up to it, I wrote Master and God, which has some great set pieces in it. There's a fire in Rome. There's things like the burial alive of a Vestal Virgin whom Domitian has perhaps unfairly accused of taking lovers. Obviously a Vestal Virgin can't do that. And there are various other things that I discovered about his reign and that I enjoyed writing hugely. And then this huge death on the marble scene where he's finished off. Somebody did at a live event ask me, was there going to be a sequel to Master and God? And I was slightly nonplussed, because if your main character has been assassinated, I do not see how you can write a sequel. The next emperor was a very old man who reigned for a very short time. And then we get into Trajan, who spent his whole time fighting in Dacia or Dacia. So there was no attraction for me there. I decided to now do my new Albia series. I was astonished by how resistant my readers were. They wanted Falco. They would only accept Falco. They wrote and told me so. They were not going to read Flavia Albia. And I think they thought if they took a firm enough stand, I would go back and write some more Falco novels. But I hadn't got any Falco novels in me. I wasn't going to do that. And besides, I'd learned from writing Master and God that I too am a paranoid tyrant. And though paranoid about losing my readership, I nevertheless tyrannically decided it was Albia or nothing. Take it or leave it. They took it. And now we have 10. We don't have the film option, but at least they gave me a certain amount of money, which helped improve my house somewhat. And they gave me the Flavia Albia series. So I will never entirely diss them, though please don't ask me about film options. I set the first Flavia Albia novel in the reign of Domitian. This was good because it gave me, instead of the sunny, making everything work background of Falco with the Emperor Vespasian sorting out Rome from the chaos of civil war, we have now a paranoid tyrant. At the end of every street, especially at night, you are liable to see his death squads marching around looking for people to execute. It's a strange society. It's very different in that sense. And I also have my lead character who has various advantages. She's a woman, so that's different. It's a different viewpoint. I'd written about Rome enough that I felt I could overcome publishers' worries that ancient Rome was too difficult for readers. And in fact, if you go into any bookshop or look online, that is certainly no longer the case. All those young men writing about gladiators and soldiers, they owe me a debt for having broken the barrier for them. But now I've got Albia, who is as tough and as feisty as they come. Obviously nothing like me, for I am meek and sweet. She's from Britain, which gives her a different viewpoint from Falco. She's been taught what Roman ideas and society are, so she can comment on them, but she's doing it always as an outsider. And she's younger than Falco had got to be. She's about the same age he was when I started writing The Silver Pigs and all those old books. I established her in the very first book as having a partner in life, just as Falco has Helena, because I am a romantic novelist. Albia has Tiberius Manlius, who is, when we start, he's a magistrate, though his term of office is just coming to an end. So he's going to be a builder. Building has featured quite a lot in my work, mainly because I've been renovating houses for much of my life. She has her first adventure on the Aventine, Falco's old haunt. And I think it was at that point when I started to write more about areas I thought I knew about and had written about. I found out that there is much more still to say about parts of Rome. So her adventures for the next 7 books are set on the 7 hills of Rome. And that is partly a joke against my editors, who had refused to let me write a series generally set on the 7 hills of Rome. So I just did that with Albia, who they were happy to have. And after about 4 books, when they hadn't noticed what I was doing, I felt compelled to tell them. I carried on writing the 7 hills books. And by the end of that time, I had established really that it was quite good to keep Albia in Rome. So in that sense, this series differs from the Falco series. I'm exploring parts of Rome, and in Desperate Undertakings, we finally got there, my latest novel, I'm doing the Campus Martius, the big flat area in the bend of the River Tiber that was full of Roman monuments. What happens in this one is that people, or a person, but it's probably people because he'll need help, are murdering people and leaving them in the monuments, especially the theatres on the Campus Martius. And it becomes obvious right from the start that this is going to be a book about Roman theatre. And what the serial killer in this book is doing is killing people in ways that they were genuinely killed on the Roman stage. We know that really horrible things were done on the Roman stage in the name of entertainment. And they are all in this book. I'm not going to tell you what they are, because part of the fun, if I can use the word fun, is that you will find that out as we go along. And it's not always going to be exactly what you expect. So I can't discuss them. But I had an interesting time with Albia and Tiberius, to some extent, discussing the morality of showing real death on the stage. It's a book very much about the theatre, because I grew up in Birmingham, as many of you will know, and I had the Birmingham Rep and the Royal Shakespeare Theatre as my local theatres. Plus, I did an English degree, so I did a lot of drama in that. So it's an interest of mine. And I'm going to read you a little bit, before we go into the Q&A, I'm going to read you a little bit from page 1, really, right from the start, for you to get the flavour. One thing I have done in this book, which I've not really done before, is that I've taken characters of my own. So some of the people who are killed are actually characters we met in one of the early Falco novels. It doesn't matter if you haven't read it, because Albia wasn't there, they haven't found her. So anything that is relevant, that needs to be explained, gets explained to Albia. So don't worry about it. But the book starts off like this, chapter 1. Who did this to you? The Undertaker. The dying woman made no sense. We were too late to save her. She had been clinging on, but she gave up on life as we tried to help her. The way she had been killed was as desperate as anything I had ever encountered. I was an investigator who had seen foul play before, but nothing as troubling, and never before with a victim who left behind such a puzzle. Why did she blame the Undertaker? Who meets their Undertaker while they are still alive? People expect a proper sequence of events. Bodies are entrusted to a funeral firm only after someone dies. Then they may be handed over for hygienic plugs, pre-cremation cosmetic work, convenient storage until relatives cough up for dusty urn space or clear a plinth in that showy mausoleum of theirs. I am a reasonable woman, at least when I cannot avoid it, so I concede that errors can be made. All right. It may sometimes happen that an incompetent doctor or a money-grubbing heir is too quick off the mark. They dispatch their hapless cadaver for processing just a smidgen too soon. Then, in the quiet gloom where the body has been carried, something changes. The corpse suddenly sits up. Determined not to go yet, it has snuffled back to life. Finding itself laid on a cushioned bier, or at least slammed down on a trestle, it probably yells. Anybody would do. In that case, a black-hearted undertaker with a pressing need for cash might swiftly apply pressure to a windpipe to make sure of his fees. Most would surely take more pleasure in announcing a miracle revival, if only to gain a free mention for their business in the Daily Gazette. Corpse stuns observers, asks for dinner and a warmer tunic. Swedius, the sinister mortician in the field of Mars, claimed to me later that corpses revived all the time. He assured me they would chase him around his premises, hilariously trying to kill him. Who could blame them for going after him? I certainly wanted to. He was an idiot. He had no soul. He gave me a lot of trouble on this inquiry. At the theatre, it seemed he and the dead woman were previously unacquainted. When Swedius turned up, he winced stagily and asked us, "Bloody hell, who is she?" It did not occur to anyone that he might be lying. Right, that's all you're getting. That's meant to force you to run and order the book immediately, which I believe can be done. The Somerset librarian ladies will tell you how to do it, I'm sure. So, suppose I stop there for a bit and we see, are there any interesting questions? Emma's going to help me with that.
I certainly am. Thank you, Lindsey, and thank you for reading that first bit of the book. I finished reading the book yesterday, and I really enjoyed it. And
thank you.
it didn't go where I thought it was going to go at all. So which is always good, because I don't like predictable novels at all. So I can highly recommend it. And yeah, as we said, they're all available in Somerset libraries. And my colleague Anne will put the link in so you can reserve a copy if you'd like. And you can also buy copies through our Libraries West website as well, and that's through local independent bookshops. So we'll be helping to support them, and Lindsey as well. So well, that's all good. So yes, we've got some questions coming through, and I've got a few questions of my own as well. So I'll start with some of them.
You're in charge. You can be the paranoid tyrant who says what questions will be asked.
The power is in my hands now. So let's have a look and see what people have been sending through. Here we go. So, oh my gosh, they're coming in thick and fast now. I'm gonna have to try and keep up with them all. So Ruth is saying, I find your characters very interesting. Are you inspired by acquaintance, or do you build them from scratch?
I know that some authors use people they know in books, but I think that's intrusive and can lead you into all sorts of trouble. So I use my knowledge of the human world. Certainly, I hope the characters I write come across as likely to be real, but on the whole, I build them from scratch. I build them to fit what's needed for a particular story, usually. As I say, in this case, I picked up some that I had invented a very long time ago, about 15 years ago, probably. And that was interesting because I could make them older. I've done the same really with all the friends and family of Albia, because they're people quite often that we met before, but I've shown how they change. And for me, this is one of the good things about writing a series, is that you get much more scope to expand on people. They can change quite dramatically, or they could just stay the same but be a bit older and more tired, or you can kill them off.
Brilliant. One of my questions was how do you feel about killing off your characters? Does it bother you, or do you grow to love them so much that you're sad when they go? Or
the very first person I killed is in The Silver Pigs, and it's a very attractive young lady who's 16 called Sosia Camilina, and I killed her off about a third of the way through the book, purely because I knew I was trying to write a crime novel and there had been no real crime. So she's doomed, she's dead, and she represents, because I was writing sort of a version of traditional mystery stories, she represents the blonde who is killed at the start of Penny Dreadfuls, and you come across a corpse maybe on a dark road in the rain, yeah. And she's blonde and she usually has no clothes on either, and then in effect you never know anything very much about that woman, and she becomes almost irrelevant. She started the story off. With Sosia, it's the complete opposite. We know her. I hope we like her. And then I killed her. And that was the hardest one I've ever done. because I liked her. Falco liked her. He liked her too much because she was too young for him. So in some ways, I was glad that she was out of the picture and he wasn't going to have to be a paedophile, really. I didn't want that to happen.
No.
Since then, often I'm killing people we don't know. In a murder story, that is often the case. This time, we did know several of the victims, but we met them a very long time ago. So any love we might have for them has probably passed by, and that they are all a bit of a pain in one way or another, all the ones who are killed. So that's easier. I have had to kill some relatives because they were just too old to stay in the series, really, and I've done that off the page, so it's not too bad. People don't like the fact that Falco's dog is dead, Nux, who was a much loved dog, but Nux really was too old to carry on as a dog, and she has a headstone, and it's all, I think it's quite sweet, really. I'm sorry about that, but Nux had to go. I could have just not mentioned it. The other big sad one is that I wrote, as well as the books, I've written some digital downloads, some short stories, or long stories, in fact, novellas they're called, and one of them is about the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which I'd always thought would be very unsuitable for a whole novel, because Falco and Albia, they're romps. You can't have a romp during a terrible eruption like Vesuvius. So I wrote it in the third person as intended to be very sad and make us feel for real characters. And we have Falco's nephew Larius and his little children who are killed in the eruption, and that was very hard to write, because I always liked Larius. I liked him as a teenager when he was all dreamy and reading love poetry and trying to get the hang of life, and I liked him actually secretly when he became older and a bad boy, which is an example of developing a character, which I was talking about. And now he's a father, and he's got a small girl who's very sweet in his eyes, and they are going to be buried in ash and die. And I found that very hard, and I was glad it was a very short book and that I could stop.
Yeah, sort of following on a little bit from that, Kif has asked a question, and I do apologise for any of my pronunciations, because they are not great. They sound all right in my head, but when I say them out loud, it might not be how they're meant to be.
Go on, so go for it.
I will be brave and ask the question on behalf of Kif. He says that given that Falco found the Domitian killed, is it Sorcia? Is that how you pronounce it? Sosia.
Sosia. That may be wrong, right, but that.
That's fine.
That's me.
That's you. I'll go with that. That's fine. In the Silver Pigs, and that Domitian knew Falco was keen to finish him. How has Falco so far survived the Domitian reign?
By keeping his head down.
Oh, there you go. That's the answer to that. Then,
I've always hinted that at some point he gets a bit too hot for him, and he may have to go and live in a retirement villa in Britain. I may never write about that, but that's one way. And one day something might happen about Domitian. Well, he will be assassinated, but we know who assassinated him, and they're not actually, apparently not Falco's relatives or Falco himself.
Lovely, thank you. Right, got some more coming through now. So Susan has said, how much do you plot in advance, or do you just write? Do you just write and see what happens?
Yes, because it's more exciting, isn't it? I know there are writers who will have gigantic synopses, and if you go on a writing course, which I have never done, I believe they will tell you that it's absolutely essential to do a gigantic synopsis before you start, so you know what you're going to write. I would be bored to tears, and it would be like writing by numbers to me. I like to sit down and think, now, where are we going to go today? The same as the reader does. Who are we going to meet? What is going to be found out? What will happen? Will there be a fight? Will there be a comic interlude? Will there be a sad interlude? And for me, then, it's fresh. I have a general idea, obviously, that somebody's going to be killed. An investigation will happen. And at some point, when I've written about 95% of the book, I'll have to decide who did it and how they get exposed. Sometimes I don't know who did it before I start. Sometimes it's very obvious. When I wrote about would-be writers in Ode to a Banker, which is also about banking because it's about patronage and how writers in Rome got paid, I knew before I started it would be a publisher who died, it would be a rejected author who would kill him, that he would be killed horribly with a scroll rod, and obviously that it would all be found out. I also knew that it would be a body in the library mystery because it obviously had to be. So sometimes it is very obvious what has to be done, and I worked through it and wrote about a whole lot of really bad writers, but also one who is very good and is going to be a bestseller. And that book made itself. Desperate Undertaking, I knew that I wanted to use Roman ways of death on the stage, and so I looked up what they were and I found 6 or 7. And so that works its way through. It has its own movement in that sense, that we go from one to another. We never know quite what's coming next. And even when we know what's coming next, it may not be exactly what we think.
I would agree with that, yes. Most definitely.
And then we may not work out what's going to happen at the end, although there are a whole lot of clues as to what does finally happen at the end. So I hope it does all make sense in that way. Other books have been different. I am not a planner because it would be too boring, and I don't know where the series is going to go. I have an overall business plan, I call it, which worries financial people deeply, that I will write 20 Albia books to match the 20 Falco books. But if I'm writing one a year, I'll be 83. So it's a question of, can my GP and my personal trainer keep me here at this desk till I'm 83? And will I still be any good when I'm 83? I'll be 73 this year, and I seem to be okay so far.
We're going to say yes to that.
We'll see. Yeah, thank you. Some people very kindly said Desperate Undertaking is my best ever. I think that's because I've just got laid back about it, really. I just write what I think will be interesting now.
Oh, that's brilliant. Doreen has just put, just as a comment, she says, I have all your books, but I hardly ever reread them if I can't sleep, because I'll carry on reading them until the alarm goes off. So obviously she can't put them down. So that's a lovely compliment.
That's good. One of the things that I am very proud of is that other people, obviously not Doreen in her insomnia, do reread them. And I think that's quite a rare thing with novels, because there are so many books published that most of us think, oh, I'll get one I haven't read. But there are people who have a sort of program, so I even put it in their diary, time to read the whole Falco and Albia series and work their way through, which is actually quite scary because I can't remember what's in them half the time. No,
that's pretty impressive, that, I have to say. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So there's a question from Sue, and she says, do you like the radio dramatizations that have been made? Is Anton Lesser your idea of Falco's voice? Because there's always that thing in your head, isn't there, of do they fit when you hear it?
Well, I've talked about that a little bit already. I do like the way they were dramatised, and I used to go. None have been done for a very long time because the BBC aren't doing much radio drama. It was very interesting how moved I was by hearing the whole of a serialization of a book that I had written. So I knew how it ended. I knew it would be all right in the end. But I found them very moving. And I thought Anton Lesser, he has a beautiful voice, of course. And it's slightly rough, but in a slightly posh way, which worked. In fact, he's a Brummie. So by birth, you wouldn't know it, and I don't know if he boasts about it, but that's one reason it was him, because they were recorded because of Mary, my friend who wrote The Archers. They were recorded in the Archers studio when the Archers wasn't being done, so that was slightly surreal, really, but very handy when at that time Anton lived in quite nearby in Birmingham, so he was cheaper. They didn't have to put him in a hotel. So they were able to get a very good quality actor without hotel charges. This is how radio works, really. Poor Mary had to decide how many characters would be in each episode because the BBC's pricing didn't allow her to use as many as you can use in a novel, where you can have endless characters.
I never knew that. That's really interesting.
It was
a little insight.
Really interesting, yes.
Yeah.
Another thing that was interesting about Anton was that the other actors, they all stood around while they were saying their piece. They didn't actually move very much, but whenever there was a fight, the actors found it was necessary that Falco should be flung to and fro.
There you go. Yeah. Someone else has asked, and it was something I was thinking about as well. It's the humour in your books that encourages Kif to reread them, and I like that you've got that sense of humour running throughout your books. And he's saying that he thinks that it's lost in the radio adaptations, and he prefers the audio books.
Only really, I can tell you, Mary does have a good sense of humour, much like mine, because we had the same education, really. It's because she had to prune it down so much.
Yeah.
There isn't time.
But when you're sorry,
there isn't time for, because quite often when Falco and Albia are telling us jokes or being not actually telling jokes in that sense, but are being humorous, they're doing it off the cuff, and it's just an aside, really. And when you're really pruning down to the action, which is what had to happen with the radio, it does get lost. Of course, in the single voice audio, it's all there. Nothing is abridged at all.
Yeah, no, you definitely feel that coming through, which is quite nice when that's sort of balancing out some of the potentially darker scenes with the murder and that. And I like that aspect of it very much.
And it's always been a part of a certain kind of detective story that the hero makes wisecracks, that there is graveyard humour, as they call it. They're literally standing at the graveside sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. Victoria's asking, do you keep a Bible, in quotes, for each character? Just wondering how much you had to remember using characters last written about in the Falco novels. So it's, how do you keep all your characters in your head and know their birthdays, their traits and everything, and keep that consistency running through?
Well, there's two parts to this question. One is that, yes, I do keep a Bible, and what I'm supposed to do, though I haven't done it for this book yet, is go through every new book and pick out anything about running characters. I don't have to do all the characters in the story because they may not come back, and that was a problem with the ones who'd been in Last Act in Palmyra, that I didn't have a Bible for them. I had to go back and read the actual book and type it out again to remind myself of their traits and characteristics. But for the friends and family people who are going to be in it again, I have a giant set of 2 sets now of box files that tell us every single characteristic, eye color, birthday, etc. And this is fine. But the second part of the answer is, it only works if I remember to look.
Yes, that's true. Oh dear. Catherine has asked, she says, I miss Helena as a character. Would you ever have her assist Albia, as she is very intelligent and feisty too? She's also just says that I have all your books, including The Course of Honour and Master and God, and that she's really looking forward to the new book. And thank you for all the fascinating stories. So, yeah.
When I started to write about Albia, I deliberately didn't have Falco and Helena in the book at all. That was for two reasons. One was that because of the film option I mentioned, there were questions of copyright to do with the characters that they might be using that made it better if I wrote about other than the main characters. And the other thing was that I knew they would take over. For Albia, and she says this in Desperate Undertaking, where they have conveniently gone to the seaside, so they aren't in it at all. She says they would, especially with people they knew, they would just take over her case. I, in the same way, I wanted to establish her in her own right. And so, although she has always talked a lot about both of them, I think I will always limit how much they appear. Having said that, I've just written a scene this very day where she goes to ask a question about something that Falco once did. So they're in it, but they won't be in the rest of the book. They'll just make a few jokes and they'll go away. I don't think I could do a scene with both Helena and Albia in it. Too much. It would be too much of a clash of people, really. So it's going to stay as it is, that they sometimes, because they are her family, she goes to see them or they come to see her. She more often sees people who are slightly more remote, like her uncles, because they are barristers now, and so it's useful for her to go and get legal advice from the Camillus brothers. She's had quite a lot to do with her younger brother because he never was a character. He's only born at the end of the Falco series. So Posthumus could be in it. But for me, the big joke is to have these Falco and Helena, these characters who are on plinths as hero and heroine, and occasionally people even say they're role models to them. But we're seeing them through Albia's eyes, and they're her mum and dad. Her rather weird, roll your eyes, here they go again with their crazy ideas, mum and dad. And I like writing that.
Yeah, you definitely feel that eye-rolling moments throughout the book, definitely. Karen has asked, what sources do you use for Roman history and in researching the way people lived in those times? And kind of adding, I know it's a bit naughty, you shouldn't ask two questions in one, but adding something else. I read somewhere, I believe, that you'd been in the sewers as part of your research.
Yes. Well, don't you? The scariest thing I have ever done. Right. Well, I have spent over 30 years researching the Roman world, but researching a very narrow corridor of it. So I know pretty well everything that you can know about 20 years worth of Roman history, and not a lot about the outside. I use anything that has survived in Latin, but I read it in English. So I use the Roman historians, Tacitus, Josephus. I use the Roman satirists, in particular, Juvenal and Martial. People like Horace, who is nicer than either Juvenal or Martial. Occasionally Seneca. I loathe the younger Pliny, but he's very good on volcanoes. And then I use archaeology. And really, whereas traditionally, novels set in the ancient world have been quite often by male public school people, they have been using to a great extent the male elitist surviving Latin literature I have gone the other way and I've used archaeology. This goes back to one of my Latin teachers who only died this summer, in fact, who was keen on archaeology and started at our school. Mary did the same. We joined the Archaeological Society because it was joint with the boys' school next door. To that single decision made by Elise Barney, my old teacher, I owe my entire career. We joined and we found the boys weren't all that interesting and weren't interested in us, but the archaeology somehow stayed with me. And we are very fortunate that we have Pompeii, really, and Herculaneum. And so we have a time capsule of one day when the world stopped and everything they were doing stayed where it was. So I use that. And because I'm not elitist, I use it from the streets up rather than the monuments down. And I think that's one of the things that distinguishes my books from quite a lot of others, that my people are in the street, they're in the bars, they're struggling with their own houses, they're doing DIY, they're doing normal people things.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the time actually, and I'm just a bit conscious that we're running out, which seems to have flown by. So I'm just going to try and squeeze one more question in, and let's have a quick look down the list of what's out there. Your website is really fascinating to have a look at, and there was one thing I was particularly intrigued about was your rants page.
I knew you were going to say that. That is the most popular bit of my website.
How did all that come about? I just need to know.
I'd like to know what makes people write to authors and ask damn silly questions that either they could find the answer quite easily for themselves, or that they are absolutely loopy. People saying the Romans didn't have cats. They have some very famous pictures of cats. And the corn incident, which taught me more than anything that Britain and America are, as they say, two nations divided by a common language, because Americans kept telling me that the Arval brothers, a strange cult in ancient Rome, could not have had reeds of corn around their head because it comes from South America. No, it doesn't. Corn is wheat or any other grain. Corn has been a word in English, which I write in. I'm getting really worked up here, as you can tell.
Oh, sorry, I asked now.
So we had the great corn rant is there. I haven't had anything rant-worthy for a very long time, and I suspect this is because I have so established that I will certainly slam you down if you ask a damn silly question. Yes.
Brilliant. Well, that's what
stuff on my website. There's really interesting stuff about the book.
There is most definitely. I could certainly recommend having a look if people haven't. It is very interesting. And I suppose kind of the end question that in any talk we always have to ask is, you've mentioned that you're writing your next book, and is any idea when this might be out? And I'm assuming this is the 11th Albia book that you're doing.
It'll be the Albia 11. I have a contract for, so it has to be done.
It has to be.
It'll be published on the 1st or 2nd Thursday of April next year. It'll be written. Yes, it will be written. I tell myself I'm very good with deadlines. I am struggling a bit with it. I can't tell you the title because we're having a lot of discussion about that. This is the worst part of writing a book, is trying to get my editor to agree what it'll be called. It'll be very different from Desperate Undertaking because I decided that was so gruesome. I had to write a family saga next. Families can be quite gruesome in their way, so it's getting livelier and livelier as it goes along, with all sorts of things that people shouldn't get up to, they are now getting up to, and there are some rabbits in it.
Okay,
that's all I'm going to say.
Well, we've definitely got that to look forward to. And for those that haven't yet read Desperate Undertaking, because it has only just come out, they've obviously got that to look forward to as well. So we are unfortunately out of time. Like I said, I can't believe how quickly it's all gone by. Thank you everyone for all your questions, and I apologise if we haven't managed to answer your question, but there were quite a few that came through there. As I've mentioned, if you'd like to read more about Lindsey's work, you can borrow a copy of her latest book or any of her books through our Libraries West website, or purchase your own copies, and there's a little link on our Libraries West website as well. So yeah, it's been an absolutely fascinating evening. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm really looking forward to the next book. So Lindsey, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who came. It's always good when there's a lot of people, even if I can't see you, and get that hum that you get in a live event. It's lovely that you all came.
Yes, thank you to all our attendees as well. So we will put a little link in the chat to a feedback survey, which will take about 2 minutes to complete. So we'd really appreciate it if you could fill that in, because it helps us to run more events like these. So if you've got the time, yeah, please do that. So I'm really sad to say we need to go, and I kind of feel like I don't want to, but a final thank you, Lindsey, and thank you everyone for attending, and good night everybody, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks for running it so well.
Oh, thank you. Good night.